The crack of a gunshot splintered the early morning calm of Willow Creek, but it wasn't outlaws or bandits that had Rosalie Turner ducking for cover behind an overturned wagon. It was her own damn rifle that had backfired when she tried to shoot a rattlesnake threatening her chickens. The year was 1878, and while most women in the Arizona Territory were tending hearths and mending clothes, Rosalie was cursing at broken firearms and struggling to manage the small homestead she'd inherited when consumption took her father 6 months prior. "Blasted thing," she muttered, examining the scorched barrel with soot-stained fingers. The gun was old, like everything else she owned, but she couldn't afford a replacement. Not with the drought threatening what little crop she'd managed to plant, and the bank making noises about calling in her father's loans. Rosalie wiped sweat from her brow, leaving a streak of dirt across her freckled face. At 24, she was considered well past marriageable age by most folks' standards, but that suited her fine. Marriage meant giving up what little independence she had, and she'd seen enough unhappy unions to know she wanted no part of it. The rattlesnake had slithered away during the commotion, leaving her chickens safe for now. Rosalie sighed and gathered her tools. The fence around the chicken coop needed mending, the well needed cleaning, and the roof had started leaking again. Too much work and not enough hands. The distant sound of hoofbeats made her tense. Visitors were rare and rarely welcome. Grabbing her broken rifle useless as it was, it still made for a good bluff. She squinted down the dusty road. A single rider approached, silhouetted against the rising sun. He rode tall in the saddle, unhurried but purposeful. As he drew closer, Rosalie could make out a weather-beaten Stetson and the outline of a gun belt. Not the tax collector then, but possibly worse. "That's far enough, stranger," she called when he was within earshot. She hefted the rifle, hoping he wouldn't notice its damaged state. The man reined his horse to a stop, raising one hand in a peaceful gesture while keeping the other visible on his saddle horn. "No trouble intended, madam. Name's Owen Clarke. I'm looking for work." Rosalie didn't lower the rifle. "No work here." Owen Clarke studied the dilapidated homestead, his eyes taking in the leaning fence posts, the patched roof, and the thin smoke rising from the chimney. "Begging your pardon, madam, but looks like there might be plenty of work, just not much money to pay for it." His frankness startled a laugh out of her. "Well, at least you're honest." She lowered the rifle slightly. "But I can't hire help, can barely feed myself most days." He dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. "I'm not asking for money, just a meal and a place to sleep in your barn. In exchange for some repairs." Now that he was closer, Rosalie could see him more clearly. He wasn't young, perhaps 30 or so, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting in the harsh sun. His clothes were worn but clean, and there was a steadiness to him that made her hesitate rather than send him on his way immediately. "Why would you work for just meals? What's your angle?" Suspicion laced her voice. "No angle. Been riding for 2 weeks, heading toward California. Could use a few days' rest before the desert crossing." He nodded toward her rifle. "That Remington's seen better days." Rosalie flushed. "It gets the job done." "Not with a barrel split like that, it doesn't," she sighed, finally lowering the useless weapon. "Fine, you can stay 2 days. First sign of trouble, and I'll introduce you to the shotgun under my bed, which works just fine." Owen nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "That seems fair." By noon, Owen had repaired 3 fence posts, patched a leak in the water trough, and was examining the well with the careful attention of someone who knew what he was looking for. Rosalie watched him from the kitchen window as she kneaded dough for bread, unable to shake her wariness despite his productivity. Men who offered something for nothing always had ulterior motives. Her father had taught her that lesson well. Yet there was a quiet competence to Owen that didn't match her idea of drifters or con men. When she brought him water, he thanked her with a nod, gulping it down in long swallows that showed his thirst. "Why are you really here?" she asked bluntly. "Willow Creek isn't exactly on the way to anywhere." Owen handed back the empty cup. "Sometimes a man needs to get lost for a while." He gestured toward the distant mountains. "Heard there was work in the silver mines, but I've had my fill of dark places." There was a story there, but Rosalie didn't press. Everyone out west had something they were running from or toward. Well, you've earned your supper at least. It'll be ready at sundown. He tipped his hat and returned to work, and Rosalie found herself watching him longer than necessary before returning to her chores. That evening, they ate stew and fresh bread at her small table, the first time she'd shared a meal with anyone since her father passed. Owen ate with the appreciation of a man who'd had too many meals of jerky and hardtack, but he maintained a certain politeness that surprised her. "This land's good," he commented. "Needs water, but the soil's rich. My father thought so. Spent 15 years trying to make it pay." She pushed her spoon around her bowl. "I've got 6 months to make good on his banknotes or they'll take it all." She hadn't meant to share that, but something about the quiet man across from her loosened her tongue. "What will you do?" he asked, no pity in his voice, just curiosity. Rosalie straightened her shoulders. "Keep working until they pry it from my cold, dead hands." That earned her the first real smile she'd seen from him, a transformation that momentarily stunned her. It softened the hard planes of his face and lit his eyes with warmth. "Figured you might say something like that." They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence. When they finished eating, Owen insisted on washing the dishes while she rested. It felt strange to sit while someone else worked in her kitchen, but her aching back appreciated the respite. "You're not what I expected," she said finally. He glanced over his shoulder. "What did you expect? Someone less?" She gestured vaguely, unsure how to describe the difference between him and the other drifters who occasionally passed through. "Decent." Owen dried the last plate and set it aside. "World's got all kinds, Miss Turner. Just like it's got all kinds of women, including those who can run a homestead on their own, broken rifle notwithstanding." His words warmed something inside her that had been cold for a very long time. The next morning, Rosalie woke to the sound of hammering. She dressed quickly and stepped onto the porch to find Owen already at work, replacing rotten boards on the chicken coop. Beside him sat her rifle, disassembled and partially cleaned. "Hope you don't mind," he called when he saw her. "Thought I might be able to salvage it." "You know about guns," he shrugged. "Enough, was a cavalry scout for a while." That explained some things: his straight posture, his watchfulness. "Union?" she asked, though the war had been over for more than a decade. "Yes, madam." "Joined late, but I was there at the end." He hammered another nail with precise force. "Your father served, Confederate, but he never held grudges about it afterward." She came closer, examining the gun parts. "You really think you can fix it?" "The barrel's done for, but I've got a spare in my saddlebag that might fit. Used to belong to a partner of mine." Rosalie raised an eyebrow. "You just happen to carry spare rifle barrels." A shadow passed across his face. He didn't need it anymore. She didn't press further. Death was a familiar companion in these lands, and everyone carried ghosts in their saddlebags one way or another. By afternoon, Owen had not only repaired the chicken coop, but had also fitted the new barrel to her rifle and reinforced the sagging corner of the barn. Rosalie found herself watching him work, admiring the efficiency of his movements and the quiet focus he brought to each task. "You'd make some woman a fine husband," she remarked as he split logs for firewood, the axe rising and falling in a steady rhythm. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Had that chance once, didn't take it." "Why not? War changes a man, makes him see things differently," he resumed, chopping. "What about you? No suitors lined up for the only woman homesteader in the territory," Rosalie snorted. "Plenty of men interested in my land, none interested in me." She glanced down at her calloused hands and patched dress. "Besides, I'm not exactly wife material. Too stubborn, too plain, too opinionated." Owen set down the axe and looked at her directly. "Sounds like you've been listening to the wrong people." There was something in his gaze that made her cheeks warm, and she turned away, uncomfortable with the flutter in her chest. "There's still daylight left. I'm going to check the irrigation ditch before supper." He let her go without comment, but she felt his eyes following her as she walked away. That night, a spring storm rolled in, bringing much-needed rain but also fierce winds that howled around the small homestead. Rosalie sat by the fire, darning socks and listening to the creaking of the house timbers. Owen had insisted on sleeping in the barn despite her reluctant offer of the floor by the hearth. A particularly loud crack followed by a crash sent her to the window. In the flash of lightning, she saw part of the barn roof had torn loose, flapping wildly in the wind. Without thinking, she grabbed her shawl and ran outside, the rain immediately soaking her to the skin. She found Owen already on the roof, struggling to secure the loose boards as the wind threatened to tear them and him away. "Get inside," he shouted when he saw her. "Not without you." She called back, climbing the ladder despite the dangerous sway of it. "You'll break your fool neck." Together, they managed to nail down the flapping section, though by the time they finished, both were drenched and shivering. The horses below whinnied nervously as thunder boomed overhead. "Come to the house," she insisted, teeth chattering. "This isn't fit shelter tonight." Too cold to argue, Owen followed her through the downpour to the cabin. Inside, she built up the fire while he stood dripping on the hearth. "You'll catch your death," she muttered, tossing him a blanket. "There's dry clothes of my father's in that trunk. They might fit well enough." While he changed behind a screen, Rosalie slipped into her bedroom to don her only nightgown and wrap herself in a quilt. When she emerged, Owen was wearing her father's old flannel shirt and trousers, both slightly too short for his frame but dry. "Thank you," he said simply. "For the clothes and for the help with the roof. Couldn't let you get blown to Kansas." She tried for lightness, but a shiver undermined her attempt. Without comment, Owen moved a chair closer to the fire for her. As she sat, he draped another blanket around her shoulders, his hands lingering for a moment longer than necessary. The simple kindness of the gesture made her throat tight. "Where did you learn all these skills?" she asked to break the sudden tension. "Seems like you can fix just about anything." He settled on the floor near her feet, stretching his hands toward the fire. "Grew up on a farm in Ohio, then the army taught me the rest." "When you're far from supplies, you learn to make do or go without. Like me," she said softly. He glanced up at her, firelight reflecting in his eyes. "Yes, like you." They talked late into the night as the storm raged outside, sharing stories, his of the war and the years of wandering after, hers of growing up on the homestead and the struggle to keep it since her father's death. It was the most she'd spoken to anyone in months, and Owen proved to be a good listener, asking questions that showed he was truly hearing her. "Why don't you sell?" he asked eventually. "Not that you should, but there must be easier ways to live than fighting this land alone." Rosalie stared into the flames. "It's all I have of him, my father. He believed in this place when no one else did, said someday this valley would be green with crops and dotted with homes." She sighed. "Maybe it was just a dream, but it was his dream. I can't let it go without trying." Owen nodded slowly. "Dreams are worth fighting for, even the impossible ones." His words stayed with her as she finally retired to her bedroom, leaving him with blankets by the fire. Sleep came slowly, her mind filled with the image of his face in the firelight and the strange comfort of having another soul under her roof. The storm passed by morning, leaving puddles and debris scattered across the property. Together, they assessed the damage minimal thanks to their midnight repair work. The rain had filled the cistern and soaked the fields, a blessing that might save her crops if the weather held. "I should be moving on," Owen said as they finished the morning chores. Storms passed. Disappointment hit Rosalie harder than she expected. "You said 2 days, that was our agreement." "So it was." He studied her face. "Would you mind if I stayed one more?" Relief washed through her. "No, I wouldn't mind at all." 1 day stretched into 3, then a week. Owen repaired the plow, helped clear a new field, and showed her how to maintain her rifle properly. Each evening, they shared meals and conversation, gradually moving from safe topics to deeper ones. He told her about losing his parents to fever, about joining the army to find purpose, about the nightmares that sometimes still woke him. She confided her fears about losing the homestead, her loneliness since her father's death, her defiant determination to succeed where everyone expected her to fail. In the second week, riders from town brought news that made Rosalie's heart sink. The banker, Mr. Hargrove, was calling in all outstanding loans early, affected by financial troubles back east. She had only 3 weeks, not 6 months, to make payment. 3 weeks, she repeated, voice hollow as the riders departed. "That's impossible. The crops won't be harvested by then." Owen watched her pace the yard, his expression thoughtful. How much do you need? $200. Might as well be $2,000 for all the chance I have of raising it. She kicked at a stone. I could sell the horses, maybe some of the tools. And then how would you work the land? He asked gently. She stopped pacing, shoulders slumping in defeat. I don't know, I don't know. That evening, Owen was quieter than usual, and when Rosalie went to bed, she heard him still moving about outside long after dark. She assumed he was preparing to leave the inevitable departure she'd been dreading more with each passing day. But morning found him still there, saddling his horse with purpose. Going to town, he explained. Need to send a telegram. Rosalie nodded, hiding her relief that he wasn't leaving for good. Be careful. Hargrove will be there, and he's not above spreading tales about me to justify taking the land. Owen's eyes hardened slightly. I'll keep that in mind. He returned that evening with supplies and a strange confidence about him. When she questioned him, he merely said he'd sent word to an old friend who might be able to help. For the next week, they worked harder than ever, getting the homestead into the best shape possible. Owen fixed the roof properly, reinforced the well, and helped plant a new vegetable garden closer to the house. Rosalie found herself laughing more than she had in years, despite the looming deadline. There was something about his steady presence that made even the impossible seem achievable. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold, Owen turned to her with uncharacteristic hesitation. There's something I need to tell you, he said. Rosalie's heart clenched, certain he was finally announcing his departure. You're leaving? No. He shook his head. Not unless you want me to. He took a deep breath. I wasn't entirely honest about why I came this way. She stiffened. What do you mean? I wasn't just drifting. I was looking for someplace specific. He met her eyes. I was a scout in the war, like I told you. But after I joined the Pinkerton agency for a time, made some connections, learned some things about people. Confusion furrowed her brow. What does this have to do with me? Not you. Hargrove. Owen's voice hardened. He's not calling in loans because of financial trouble back east. He's working with the railroad company, acquiring land along their planned route at a fraction of what they'd have to pay willing sellers. Rosalie stared at him. How do you know this? The telegram I sent was to a former colleague who has access to the railroad's plans. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. Your land sits right where they want to build a depot. It's worth 10 times what Hargrove is asking in loan repayment. She took the paper with trembling hands, unfolding it to reveal a map with survey markings. Her homestead was circled in red ink. So they're cheating me. Anger replaced shock, using my father's debt to steal what's rightfully mine. Yes, but now you know, Owen's eyes gleamed, and knowledge is power. The next morning, they rode to town together, Rosalie wearing her one good dress and her mother's cameo brooch. The bank was a modest building on Main Street, with Mr. Hargrove's office in the rear. They found him at his desk, spectacles perched on his nose as he reviewed ledgers. Miss Turner. He barely glanced up. I don't believe your payment is due yet. I've come to discuss terms, Mr. Hargrove. She stood straight, channeling all the confidence she could muster. I understand you're in a hurry to acquire my land. That got his attention. He looked up sharply, then noticed Owen standing silently behind her. Something like recognition flashed in his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about, he said carefully. Your father borrowed money. The note is due. The note, Rosalie said, placing the railroad map on his desk, was not due for 6 months, according to the papers my father signed. You've called it early because you know something I didn't. Hargrove's face paled as he glanced at the map. Where did you get this? The question, Owen spoke for the first time, stepping forward, is whether the railroad knows you're acquiring land in their name without authorization. My contacts suggest they don't. The banker's eyes darted between them. What do you want? Fair value for my land, Rosalie stated firmly. 10 times the loan amount, or I take this information to the territorial judge and the railroad company. What followed was an hour of tense negotiation, with Hargrove blustering and threatening before finally conceding when Owen quietly mentioned specific names at the railroad that made the banker's face go ashen. By the time they left, Rosalie had a bank draft for $1,800, the loan forgiven and fair payment for her land. She stood in the dusty street, the paper clutched in her hand, feeling lightheaded with disbelief. I can't believe that worked. She looked up at Owen. How did you know? I've seen this scheme before. Railroad towns are where the money is these days. He guided her toward their horses. The question is, what will you do now? Reality crashed in. She'd saved her honor and gained a small fortune by frontier standards, but she'd lost her home. I don't know. Buy land elsewhere, I suppose. Owen helped her mount, then swung into his own saddle. There's good land to the north, closer to water. You've seen it, he nodded. Pass through on my way here. Fertile valley, fewer settlers, room to build something new. The way he said it made her heart skip. Are you suggesting we? She stopped, uncertain. I'm not suggesting anything yet, he said carefully. Except that you take time to consider your options, all of them. They rode back to the homestead in contemplative silence. That night after supper, Rosalie stepped outside to find Owen on the porch watching the stars come out. I've been thinking, she said, joining him at the railing, about what you said, about options. He turned to face her, his expression open but guarded. And I've spent my whole life trying to fulfill my father's dream. Maybe it's time I found my own. She took a deep breath. Would you show me that northern valley you mentioned? Something like hope kindled in his eyes. I would. But Rosalie, before you decide anything, there's something else you should know. What's that? I wasn't just passing through, I came looking for you specifically. He held up a hand when she started to speak. Not for the land or the railroad. Because of letters, your father wrote to my commanding officer during his illness. Letters asking if anyone knew of a good man who might help his daughter after he was gone. Rosalie stared at him, stunned. My father asked for help, for me. He knew you'd never accept charity or an arranged marriage, but he hoped you might accept partnership from someone who proved their worth. Owen's voice softened. I came to honor a promise to a good man. I stayed because of you. Tears blurred her vision. It sounded exactly like something her stubborn, loving father would do. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have let me stay if I had? Or would you have sent me packing for suggesting you needed help? She laughed despite her tears, recognizing the truth in his words. Probably the latter. That's what I thought, he smiled, reaching tentatively to brush a tear from her cheek. For what it's worth, you're the strongest person I've ever met, man or woman. The touch of his fingers against her skin sent warmth spreading through her. Yet here I am, about to lose my home. No. His voice was firm. You're about to choose your future, there's a difference. In that moment, looking into his earnest face, Rosalie saw a possibility she'd never allowed herself to consider. Not just survival, but partnership. Not just independence, but shared strength. I don't know if I could be a proper wife, she whispered, voicing her deepest fear. I'm not gentle or obedient or any of the things men seem to want. Owen's laugh was soft and genuine. I've had my fill of proper doesn't survive out here. He took her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. I'm not asking for a proper wife, Rosalie. I'm asking if you might consider building something together, whatever shape that takes. She looked down at their joined hands. I am unfit to be a wife, she said softly. I'm too stubborn, too independent. I speak my mind and I won't be ruled. Owen lifted her chin with his free hand, his eyes serious but warm. Then be fit only for me, because those are exactly the qualities I admire most. The simple truth in his words broke something loose inside her, a knot of loneliness and doubt she'd carried for years. Before she could overthink it, Rosalie leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as his arms came around her. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, she saw in his eyes the same wonder she felt. Is that a yes? He asked, voice husky. She smiled, feeling truly free for the first time in memory. It's a let's see that northern valley first, then we'll talk about the rest. Owen laughed and pulled her close again. I can work with that. 2 months later, Rosalie stood on a ridge overlooking a verdant valley where a half-built cabin sat nestled against a stand of pines. Beside her, Owen was pointing out the boundaries of the land they'd claimed together, 160 acres of promise. The creek won't run dry even in summer, he was saying, and there's good grazing for cattle on that western slope. She nodded, but her attention was on the cabin with its solid foundation and the beginnings of a front porch already taking shape. Their porch, "It's going to be beautiful," she said softly. Owen followed her gaze. "It's not much yet. It will be." She took his hand, the gold band on her finger still new enough to surprise her when it caught the light. It already is. They'd been married by a traveling judge 3 weeks earlier, a simple ceremony with only the storekeeper and his wife as witnesses. Their wedding night had been spent under the stars, learning each other with the same patient care they brought to all their shared undertakings. Now, as the afternoon sun gilded the valley, Rosalie felt a contentment she'd never thought possible. Not because she'd surrendered her independence, but because she'd found someone who valued it, who valued her exactly as she was. "No regrets?" Owen asked, reading her thoughts as he often seemed to do. She turned to face him, this man who had wandered into her life when she needed him most, who had seen her strength when others saw only her limitations. "Not a single one," she answered truthfully. Then, with the directness that was so much a part of her nature, she added, "Though you should know, we'll need to add another room to the cabin plans." His brow furrowed in confusion, then cleared as understanding dawned. "Are you saying?" Rosalie nodded, her smile widening at the joy that transformed his face. "Spring. Doctor in town confirmed it yesterday." Owen whooped, lifting her off her feet in a careful embrace before setting her down as if she were made of porcelain. "A baby," he marveled. "Our baby." "Our family," she corrected, resting her hand on her still flat stomach. "Something I never thought I'd have." He covered her hand with his own. "Your father would be proud of what you've built, what we're building." Rosalie looked out over the valley again, seeing not just what was there now, but what would be the orchard they'd plant, the fields they'd tend, the children who would run and play in the yard. A new dream, built on the foundation of her father's, but uniquely their own. "Yes," she said, leaning against Owen's solid warmth. "I think he would." As the sun began its descent toward the distant mountains, they made their way down the ridge toward their half-built home, hand in hand. Unfit to be just any man's wife perhaps, but perfectly suited to be this man's partner and he to be hers.